Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who had a little baby daughter. They asked all the fairies in the kingdom to the christening, but unfortunately forgot to invite one of them because it happened that there were 13 fairies and the king had only 12 gold plates for the feast. So he was obliged to pretend he had forgotten the 13th fairy. The 12 fairies came to the christening and they each brought a magic gift to the infant princess. One gave her beauty, another health and happiness, another cleverness, another sweet temper and a kind heart, and so on until it came to the 12th fairy. But before she could speak, the door flew open and in there swept the 13th fairy, who had not been invited. She had an ugly frown on her face and looked so angry that everyone drew back to let her pass. Straight up to the baby she went, and she looked crossly at the little beautiful baby. "You shall have my gift, though I was not invited to the christening," she said with a smile. "When you are 15 years old, you shall prick your finger with a spindle and fall down dead." Then she cast an evil look around and flew out of the window. Everyone stood quite silent with a grief and horror until the 12 fairies stepped forward and waved her wand. "I have still a gift to bestow," she said, "and though I may not change the wicked fairy's prophecy, I can at least make it less evil. The princess shall not die when she pricks her finger with a spindle, but she fall into a deep sleep which will last 100 years." Then all the fairies left the palace, and the king and the queen began to think that perhaps the wicked fairy had been only a bad dream. But in case any harm should really come to the little Princess Aurora, it was ordered that every spinning wheel in the kingdom should be destroyed. And very soon, not a spindle was to be found throughout all the land and the breadth of the land. Now the fairy gift which has been given to the princess were seen more and more clearly by mortal eyes as she grew older. She was as beautiful as a flower, and as clever as she was good, and as happy as the day was long. The king and the queen thought no more of the evil prophecy, and so the years slipped by until Aurora was 15. It happened that on her 15th birthday, the king and the queen went out together, and the princess was left all alone in the palace and began to feel very dull. So she thought she would go through all the rooms in the palace and look for the adventures. After a while, she came to a little third stair which she never remembered having seen before. And when she climbed to the top, she came to a curious little door. The princess knocked, and an old cracked voice cried out, "Come in." And when Aurora opened the door, she saw a little old woman sitting there with a spinning wheel. "Oh, what a funny thing that is," said Aurora, looking at the spinning wheel, for she had never seen such a thing before. "How I love to make it go whirling round and round," and she put in her hand to touch it. But the spindle pricked her finger and a tiny drop of blood sprang out. Before she had even time to cry out, part of the very evil prophecy came through, for she sunk down on the stone bench and fell fast asleep. At that very moment, everybody and everything in the palace stopped what they were doing and fell fast asleep too. The king and the queen sat down in the two royal chairs. The cook in the kitchen, who was just going to the box the scullion ears, went fast asleep with her hands still in the air. The scullion, with its mouth wide open, ready to roar with the pain, left it open and went fast asleep too. The horses in the stable went to sleep in the middle of eating their corn. The pigeons in the stable roof hadn't even time to tuck their heads under the wings, but fell fast asleep as they were strutting around with their tails still spread out. The flies slept on the ceiling. The canary did not want to have the green cover put over in cage, but slept in the broad daylight. The fire stopped crackling and burning. The pot stopped boiling. Nothing stirred, nothing moved. Not a sound was heard, only round the palace there sprung up a hedge of aurora which grew taller and taller as time went on until the palace was quite hidden and even the top of the flagstaff could be seen. And as the years went by, people began to forget about the palace. Only the old people would tell the children sometimes about the beautiful princess who once lived in the palace where Aurora grew. But the children thought it was a make believe story, for the hedge was so thick and so high that no one could see what inside. Sometimes Prince would come riding by and listen to the tale, and then try and cut his way through the thick hedge to see if there was really a beautiful princess on the other side. But the thorns tore everyone who tried to force his way through, and sometimes put out his eyes, so the princess grew tired of trying. And each year the hedge grew taller and thicker. Now it happened that on the very day when the princess had been asleep for 100 years, there chanced to come to that country prince who was braver and handsome than any of the princes who had come before. He had never known what it meant to be beaten or given, and even heard the story of the Princess Aurora. He made up his mind to find her. But when he got to great hedge, he found it covered with the pale pink roses, and the branches parted in front of him to make a passage, and all the thorns looked the other way. On he walked through the cool green path, while the roses nodded and smiled on him all the way. And when he came to the other side, he saw a stately palace, just as the old people had described it. Not a sound broke the solemn stillness, not a leaf whispered in the breeze. Then, when he entered the great hall, he saw the king and the queen fast asleep on their royal chairs, and everything and everybody were exactly the same as when they had fallen asleep 100 years ago. Presently, the prince noticed a third step that led to the tower, and he climbed them, just as the princess had done. And when he opened the door and stepped in, he stood still in wonder and delight. The princess lay there fast asleep, her fair face turned toward him, just as she had sunk down to rest 100 years ago. Everything was unchanged except that now and around the bed was a canopy of aurora protecting her as she slept. The flower breathed their beauty around her, and the sharp thorns guarded her from all harm. So beautiful did the princess look lying there, like a pale roses herself, that the princess was drawn to her side and bending over her. He kissed her cheek. The prince's eyelid quivered, and the next moment her eyes opened. She looked up and oh, she cried, "You have come at last. I have been dreaming and dreaming of you, and I've thought you were never coming to wake me." Now, the moment the princess opened her eyes, everyone and everything in the palace began to awake too. The king and the queen walked with stately tread through the hail. The cook gave the scullion a sounding box on his ear. The scullion roared with his mouth wide open. The horses went on eating their corn. The flies walked busy up and down the ceiling, and the great hedge of Aurora sunk down and down till it vanished in the earth, and not even a bud was left. But what does it matter if the roses are gone? Said the prince, since I have got my own Aurora, who is fairest of them all. And so on, they were married and lived happily ever after.